video, we covered the basics of the theory that the Avvar goddess, the Lady of the Skies, is synonymous with the Elven goddess Mythal. We also looked into ways that Korth the Mountain Father might have been a Titan, and established the groundwork for a complex look into early mythology, legend, and oral history for Thedas. In this video, we'll take that a step further, breaking down some of those early myths and what historical record we do have to analyse some of the earliest events in our timeline fundamental to the shaping of the world. If you have not watched part 1, you should do that first. What little information we have of this time is limited, but that does not mean it doesn't exist at all. We have ancient frescoes, murals, and mosaics, as well as Veilfire runes located in Elven temples. We have Elven song and oral history, as well as Dalish legends, which, however inaccurate in the literal sense, do contain grains of truth. We have Dwarven cultural mythos, which give us a greater understanding of the Titans and the impact that Elven rule had on Dwarven culture. We also have Avvar legends of Korth the Mountain Father and the Lady of the Skies, as well as Chased and Alamari tales about the Witches of the Wilds, which extend up into Antiva and the Witch of the Talari Swamps, who is one of Flemeth's daughters. Flemeth's own legends might also be considered, and we also have primary source accounts of Elvhenan from the Vidathara. There is also something to be said for considering what part Qunari beliefs play in reflecting some of these early events. After all, the Qunari were shaped by the circumstances of the world as much as any other culture, and their efforts to chase down Elven relics and knowledge in Trespasser is suspect, unless there are also greater forces of principle being served by such actions. We should also not discount Tevinter, with its pantheon of old gods and its cultural importance on a global scale. This is where the elements of this theory become very big and very messy. Much of Thedas does connect, because much of what we know of modern Thedas has its roots in the same fundamental events all of these different cultural groups experienced and grew from. The course of history was shaped by the Dwarven split from the Titans, as well as by the formation of the Vale. It's been similarly shaped by the cracking of the Golden City and the subsequent blights, and also again by the rise of Andraste. These events, while spiralling off into different cultural outcomes, are the pivotal moments upon which Thedosian history turns, and so it behooves us to consider as much as possible what points of impact led Thedas to its modern-day cultural iterations. This question requires looking beyond solely the elves, or the dwarves, or the humans, or the Qunari, and considering the combined world in which all these different groups exist. Each of the pivotal moments that changed the landscape of Thedas became the impetus for a whole slew of cultural developments. As one example of many, it was the Dwarven split from the Titans that facilitated trade with the outside world. This in turn bolstered Tevinter power with an alliance between the Dwarven Empire and the newly united Neremenian tribes. But it was also Tevinter's contact with the Forbidden Ones and their ilk, Zebenket, Gaxkang, Imshale and the Formless One, that led to the rise of blood magic, demonic influences, and the adoption of the old gods within the Imperium. The adoption of these gods was responsible for the unification of the Tevinter tribes, as the Neremenians marched to war under the banners of Dumat to forge the Tevinter Imperium in the first place. Both of these events, the rise of the Tevinter Imperium and the rise of the Dwarven Empire, are interlinked. Since the Forbidden Ones were ancient Elven cast into the depths of the Fade by the Evanuris, and the Evanuris was similarly responsible for the fall of the Titans and its impact on the dwarves, it is the case that the actions of the Evanuris paved the way for the rise of the next empires to follow Elvhenan, the Dwarven Empire, and the Tevinter Imperium. But for all that we know the Evanuris had a significant impact on the formation of Thedas, our picture of their rise to power and the development of Elvhenan itself is limited. And this is where the exploration of those currently existing myths, the evaluation of Vidathara codices, and the examination of the focal points of history at large come into play. The first big event we have, where the cultures crossed paths, does appear to be where the ancient Dwarven culture under the Titans and the ancient Elven culture under the Evanuris really clashed. In the previous video we set out the case for the origins of the Elven. Basically under that premise, the Elven are spirits who have taken on a physical form. This means they existed at the intersection of the Fade and the Earth. We don't have a first-hand account of this actually taking place, but we are aware that the Evanuris were allowed specific forms reserved for the gods, namely draconic forms, and we know that in the time before the Veil it was these great dragons that ruled the world. We get this information from Yavanna, one of Flemeth's daughters, and the resident Witch of the Wilds in the Talari Swamps, whose task is to guard over these sleeping dragons and to try and wake them from slumber. Dragon blood is powerful. This form is something that becomes available only to Morrigan, who has spent a lifetime studying the ancient ways, and who learned shapeshifting under Mythal directly, assuming she drinks from the Well of Sorrows in Inquisition. This draconic form is one we see Flemeth undertake on several occasions as well, where she suggests that maybe she is a dragon. The worship of dragons has been passed down from the time of Elvhenan through the height of the Tevinter Imperium and down into the dragon cults of modern day. The Qunari believe that this form represents power unchecked and should be destroyed, which is not too far from the truth if we consider that the Evanuris indeed were powerful beings running almost unchecked. But it is also Qunari belief that it is the blood of these great dragons which has enabled the shaping of the modern world, with the most significant example being of Calenhad the Silver Knight, who was responsible for uniting Ferelden. In their legends, the Qunari claim that Calenhad was told by the Witch of the Wilds to seek out a great dragon and to drink its blood, becoming a powerful reaver and thus gaining the ability to unite the clans beneath him. That blood runs in the veins of the Theron scions to this day, and it is likely true that this did happen, as Maric Theron makes a deal with Flemeth before reclaiming his throne, to one day journey to the Silent Grove and her daughter Yavanna, and help awaken the slumbering great dragons. But we see the might of the draconic gods elsewhere, such as in regards to the Alamari god Hakon, who has been trapped in the form of a dragon since the time of the Second Blight, and held at bay by the first Inquisitor Ameridan. It is the spirit within this draconic form that matters in this case, the spirit that must be freed, something which echoes the same concept under which the Grey Wardens battle or save the spirits of the corrupted archdemons, either through the sacrifice of the self or through the dark ritual, again strangely linked to Flemeth. This draconic form is closely guarded, reserved for the Evanuris because it is a symbol of power and their would-be divinity. Those who are unworthy who take on this form feel Elgar'nan's vengeance, not Mythal's mercy, according to the ancient Elven writing that we find in the Temple of Mythal. This idea of Mythal being linked to justice continues to hold elsewhere. She is in many ways the balance, the spiritual form representing protection. It is the All-Father Elgar'nan who is the spirit of vengeance. This is true not only in his name, which means spirit of vengeance, but in his origin myths. And it is here we're given the first hint as to how the Evanuris came to power. While we have no mention from the Avvar as to the origin of the Lady of the Skies or Korth the Mountain Father, we do have Dalish legends which, when taken with a grain of salt, prove to be rather interesting. The origin stories of Elgar'nan and Mythal are together as follows. Long ago, when time itself was young, the only things in existence were the sun and the land. The sun, curious about the land, bowed his head close to her body, and Elgar'nan was born in the place where they touched. The sun and the land loved Elgar'nan greatly, for he was beautiful and clever. As a gift to Elgar'nan, the land brought forth great birds and beasts of the sky and forest, and all manner of wonderful green things. Elgar'nan loved his mother's gifts and praised them highly, and walked amongst them often. The sun, looking down upon the fruitful land, saw the joy that Elgar'nan took in her works, and grew jealous. Out of spite he shone his face full upon all the creatures of the earth had created, and burned them all to ashes. The land cracked and split from bitterness and pain, and cried salt tears for the loss of all she had wrought. The pool of tears cried for the land became the ocean, and the cracks in her body the first rivers and streams. Elgar'nan was furious at what his father had done and vowed vengeance. He lifted himself into the sky and wrestled the sun, determined to defeat him. They fought for an eternity, and eventually the sun grew weak, while Elgar'nan's rage was unabated. Eventually Elgar'nan threw the sun down from the sky and buried him in a deep abyss, created by the land's sorrow. With the sun gone, the world was covered in shadow, and all that remained in the sky were the reminders of Elgar'nan's battle with his father, drops of the sun's lifeblood, which twinkled and shimmered in the darkness. Elgar'nan had defeated his father, the sun, and all was covered in darkness. Pleased with himself, Elgar'nan sought to console his mother, the earth, by replacing all that the sun had destroyed. But the earth knew that without the sun nothing could grow. She whispered to Elgar'nan this truth, and pleaded with him to release his father, but Elgar'nan's pride was great, and his vengeance was terrible, and he refused. It was at this moment that Mythal walked out of the sea of the earth's tears, and onto the land. She placed her hand on Elgar'nan's brow, and at her touch he grew calm, and knew that his anger had led him astray. Humbled, Elgar'nan went to the place where the sun was buried, and spoke to him. Elgar'nan said he would release the sun, if the sun promised to be gentle, and to return to the earth each night. The sun, feeling remorse for what he had done, agreed. And so the sun rose again in the sky, and shone his golden light upon the earth. Elgar'nan and Mythal, with the help of the earth and the sun, brought back to life all the wondrous things that the sun destroyed. and they grew and thrived. And that night, when the sun had gone to sleep, Mythal gathered the glowing earth around his bed and formed it into a sphere to be placed in the sky, a pale reflection of the sun's true glory. First impressions show that this is not actually possible within the mechanics of the world, which, due to weather patterns, the whole concept of night and day, and the application of seasons and time, proves that Thedas is planetary and not flat, something the dwarves are very aware of because Ren in Descent has dialogue line about the centre of the earth. This means that night and day are not created by Elgar'nan getting mad at the sun. The moon, there's 2 moons actually in Thedas in the lore, is not Morrigan's sister, and Mythal was not literally birthed from a sea of tears. But we do know this. The earth is capable of reacting and thought. If Leliana is killed in Origins at the Temple of Sacred Ashes, the site of a Titan, she is brought back for DA2 and Inquisition as some form of Illyrium ghost sung into being. And the Titan that wakes in Descent is lonely and frightened because of the breach, but settles after it connects with Valta. The earth has feelings and ideas, and is capable of putting them into practice. It is also important that the earth itself remembers. After all, memories are carved into Illyrium, and it is the memory of Illyrium ghost, Leliana, that serves the Inquisition. We know that the Evanuris were spirits given form, and this means that Elgar'nan and Mythal were birthed in the Fade in the same way that all spirits are, through the concentration of ideas, which is something that we learn from Solus, but which is confirmed in Avvar lore. If the earth, the land in this legend, is capable of forming thought and idea, then the Fade, the sun or the sky in this legend, is capable of bringing that concentrated idea to life in the form of a spirit, thus creating Elgar'nan and Mythal, spirits born of the ideas of the earth, where it touches the Fade. And we should not discount that Elgar'nan and Mythal are much the same spirit, justice, or its demonic form of vengeance. It is not nearly so clear-cut as that, but it took one of the same sort to mollify the other, and they are both spirits that are in the same way linked to balance and to judgment. In some theories, they might even be one in the same. The difference is in the creation. Mythal was born of regret, of sadness and sorrow, of loss. And it is Flemeth herself who tells us in DA2 that regret is something I know well. Take care not to cling to it, to hold it so close that it poisons your soul. It stands to reason, all things considered, that her high priests were responsible for the maintenance of the Well of Sorrows, the Virabella San, which actually directly translates more to the path or way of sorrow. It was this regret that could temper Elgar'nan's rage, if the tale is to be believed, and this plays out in the lore we do have as well, such as references to Mythal's mercy and justice from her temple, and the Vedathara. But for all that this was her role, Mythal was also the protector, at times capable of ferocity. The invocation to summon her from her altar in Dragon Age Inquisition is as follows. We few who travel far, call to me and I will come, without mercy, without fear. Cry havoc in the moonlight, let the fire of vengeance burn. The cause is clear. The additional line is only provided if Solus is in your party, and it is he who declares that it is an ancient invocation for Mythal. This protection and this call for vengeance is not limited to Mythal alone, and her victories are celebrated as much as those of Elgar'nan. Examples of prayers, which are sometimes notably called songs, go as follows. Elgar'nan, wrath and thunder, give us glory, give us victory over the earth that shakes our cities. Strike the usurpers with your lightning, burn the ground under your gaze, bring winged death against those who throw down our work. Elgar'nan, help us tame the land. In this place we prepare to hunt the pillars of the earth. Their workers scurry witless, soulless. This death will be a mercy. We will make the earth blossom with their passing. For one moment there's a vivid image of 2 overlapping spheres. Unknown flowers bloom inside their centres. Then it fades. Hail Mythal, adjudicator and saviour. She has struck down the pillars of the earth and rendered their demesne unto the people. Praise her name forever. These prayers follow a similar theme, a war against the pillars of the earth, which an inquisitor who's drunk from the Well of Sorrows translates to mean the Titans if the Descent DLC is completed before Trespasser. The second source is significant, as it represents the overlapping of 2 spheres, in much the way one might overlap the earth and the Fade, the physical world and the mental world, and in its centre blossoms life, spirits, the Evanuris, the world of the Elven. Mythal and Elgar'nan are considered the first of the Evan-Uris, but there were others. We shall consider the dynamics of their interactions in greater detail in the next video, but for now we will focus on these two forces because there is much here to discuss. The elves are waging war on the pillars of the earth according to the song to Elgar'nan because the Titans are destroying the cities they build and need to be tamed. They describe their workers, likely the dwarves, as witless and soulless because they themselves are still linked closely to the Fade, with spirits as teachers and the spiritual achievements that link them back to their origins. Elvhenan was built in the spaces between the two, with the crossroads formed to link physical locations via the Fade, with practices such as Uthanera, which allows physical form to be temporarily shed to explore the depths of the Fade. The codex from the Virdathara attentive listeners described a spirit of learning, lecturing to elves about how best to bend the world to their will. The pages of this book, Memory, show a solemn group of elves in an amphitheatre of living wood, entire trees grown into seats and stairs for the listeners to recline on. Two other elves in a spirit of learning are speaking in turn on ways to bend the properties of the material world when casting spells. At the end, the spirit, with an air of a senior lecturer, floats forward and booms in a surprisingly deep voice. The unchanging world is delicate. Spells of power invite disaster and annihilation. The unchanging world is stubborn. The pull of the earth fiercely resists making fire run like water, or stone rise like mist. The unchanging world rings with its own harmony. Listen with fearless hearts, and great works will unfold. And we know that the elven cities that were crafted partly of the Fade and partly of the physical realms, such as the Virdathara itself, do actually bend these rules, from additional Virdathara codices Raising the Senalium and Homecoming, which detail not only the masterpiece of elven cities, but the creation of entire pocket realms like the one that houses the Crossroads. The pages of this book, Memory, describe a heated argument between a group of well-dressed elves inside an elaborately arched pavilion on an island floating in a void. In the distance, haloed by a blizzard of light, thousands of elves are maintaining an elaborate magical ritual that pulls raw essence from the Fade, funneled into a sphere in the air. Through the lens of the sphere can be seen a world of indigo waterfalls and rust-red jungles, and a temple palace so frescoed and cleverly carved it is a masterpiece in itself. The well-dressed elf shouting grows loud, and it can be heard over the magic. One leaps at another, howling and pulling out a knife burning with prismatic flame. Architects of the Grand Senalium, a gift from Blessed Silas to clever June, as thanks for a great favour, in friendly debate over the colour of the palace's roof trim. The pages of this book, Memory, describe an elf approaching a city of glass spires so deeply blue they ache. The city's outskirts are wrapped in lakes of mist, and figures stroll along the pearly glowing strips as if they walked on solid ground. Groves of trees woven into enormous parks shelter elves in quiet hollows, while other elves walk below a river churning along an invisible shoal in the air. The scene hums with quiet talk and contentment as the Memory's maker reaches the city gates, already thrown open wide. These are the creations the Titans were bringing down, the creations that the Titans were originally destroying. It was these that led to the appeals to the Evan-Uris for help, and likely were responsible in cementing their roles as gods. After all, the Titans are literally the shapers of the earth, and that means to match them requires a significant amount of power. It was Mythal, we are told, who brought down the first, according to the Veilfire runes in the deep roads of Trespasser. It is her effigy that graces those halls deep in the Lyrian mines, and her influence from the elven poem we find in the torn notebook codices from that same mine that suggests she gave the dwarves dreams. Whether she did this is up for debate. The dwarves certainly don't dream now, and if they did before, then they were not the mindless workers the elven seem to believe they were. The dwarves have always been the children of Titans, in the way that the spirits are the children of the Fade, and there is a necessary difference between creatures of fluid shape but fixed idea, and creatures of fixed shape but fluid idea. In truth, the dwarven culture itself reinforces this, from what we see in the modern day. Their paragons are great warriors and tacticians now, those who serve the dwarves, but they are also the most creative of individuals. Caradin rediscovered the lost art of creating golems. Paragon Ebrian was exalted for poetry. Paragon Varin realized you can actually eat nugs. Paragon Branca found smokeless coal. Paragon Firel was a master runesmith. On the list goes. All of these examples are creative thinkers, and all claim the title of living ancestor. which, given dwarves are originally the children of titans, suggests the original living ancestors might even have been the titans themselves. Since the ideas of the earth gave birth to the likes of Leliana's Illyrian ghost, or the dwarves themselves, or possibly the spirits that became Elgar'nan and Mythal, we find ourselves with an interesting picture to consider. This war was waged because the balance was upset. But Mythal was not the only one of the Evan to subjugate a titan. According to Vedithara codices, so did Elgar'nan, and fairly early on, he then had it carved into a likeness of himself. Trespasser gives us a bit more insight into this conflict. Rather than a single event, it became a hunt, and that hunt was for more than just lyrium. According to the Inquisitor, the Evan hunted the Titans for lyrium and something else. What that something else was is unknown, though it likely centered around power, because in bringing down the pillars of the earth, the Evan cemented themselves as the true might of Elvhenan. They established themselves as gods, punishing those who would seek to emulate them, such as the Chosen of Dirthamen when he took on draconic form. And this would ultimately lead to later conflicts among the Elven, and even within the ranks of the Evan themselves. Mythal herself is described by Solus as the best of them, the one who cared about everyone, who stood for justice. In truth, the iteration that Elgar'nan buried the sun in his legends is important, because we see this symbolism again in dwarven imagery and also in further codices. The very same Veilfire runes that speak of Mythal's subjugation of titans gives us this imagery. For a moment the scent of blood fills the air, and there is a vivid image of green vines growing and enveloping a sphere of fire. The vision grows dark, an eon seems to pass, then the runes crackle as if filled with an angry energy. A new vision appears, elves collapse in caverns, sealing the deep roads with stone and magic. Terror, heart-pounding, ice-cold as the last of the spells is cast. A voice whispers, what the Evanuris in their greed could unleash would end us all. Let this place be forgotten. Let no one wake its anger. The people must rise before their false gods destroy them all. We see this image as well on the back of a dwarven chair located in Kaurapatha, which additional sources from the Venatori have confirmed predate to winter exposure, depicting again these same strange vines and the sun. And of course we are familiar now with the interior of a titan, which is full of sunlight. And we know that that is sunlight because photosynthesis is happening here to feed all of the plants growing in this area. This strange blossoming between the two spheres of the Fade and the Earth, the sun linking to the Titans and being buried by Elgar'nan, only for Mythal's mercy to allow it to again emerge, and the subjugation of the Titans for lyrium but also for power, creates a strange intersection of magics and existence. With the defeat of the Titans, the Evanuris reigned supreme over Elvhenan, and also over the dwarves, who mined lyrium and perhaps had strange dreams. The Titans were not hunted to extinction, but they did become dormant forces, no longer threatening cities, because it is after this point that dwarven records begin. By the time Elvhenan is shattered by the Veil, the dwarves have a flourishing culture that has moved on from their previous existence to a point where they're capable of arranging trade agreements with Tevinter. These trade agreements mean the dwarves themselves actually in some cases turn upon the elves, such as what happened at Cadalash when refugees from Arlathan, who took refuge in the city, found themselves on the wrong end of Kalsharok's swords. While we cannot say with any certainty that the Titans fell to slumber at this point, likely this happened due to the creation of the Veil, we do know that they stopped being a threat to the Evanuris, at least until the elves woke in anger in the darkness and were forced to collapse their tunnels and flee to the surface. We'll discuss more on that particular point at a later date, but for now it is enough to know that the Evanuris gained great power from their defeat of the Titans and their subjugation of the earth. Elvhenan flourished in the years to come, and the Titans stopped being a threat. But the story does not and cannot end here. After all, it was Elgar'nan's vengeance in his origin story that buried the sun, and Mythal who stopped him. Elgar'nan might not have buried the actual sun, but he definitely turned his anger and rage on the Titans, if he was willing to carve his own effigy in their fallen forms. The pages of this book, Memory, describe a monument made in a single afternoon by 1,000 toiling servants swarming over a lump of fallen stone as large as a collapsed mountain. By the end of the day, the stern figure of Elgar'nan stares down into the valley, carved out from the foothills of the rock. The slaves have disappeared. Light radiates from the Eidolon's narrowed eyes and its open, snarling mouth. Hail, Elgar'nan, first among the gods. Mark his victory eternal. It was this victory that made him first among the gods and sealed his name eternally. It was this victory that gave him power and arguably gave power to the other Evanuris as well. But Mythal's connection to the Lady of the Skies paints a very different sort of story, and the way the dwarves are described as more of her children, and the very fact she is a spirit of justice, of mercy and protection, of love, suggests that the fall of the Titans would not be something she would celebrate or revel in as Elgar'nan did. And to this end we consider the Alamari legends, the connections of the Lady of the Skies to Koth the Mountain Father, and the story gets a little bit more complex. If Koth was indeed a Titan, or his mountain home of Belinus was, we cannot discount the fact that in our Avvar myths the Lady of the Skies wept to find the site destroyed, and thus created Lake Calenhad. The fact this destruction happened at the hands of a serpent should not be overlooked. This was a battle between Koth and Nathramar, between a mountain and a dragon, between the earth and the sky, between a Titan and an Evanuris, and witnessing it brought great sorrow to the Lady of the Skies. In other tales, Koth the Mountain Father asked for the Lady of the Skies to help him move Belinus to her domain away from the reach of others, and the lady agreed, extending this protection. If, as discussed in Part 1, the Alamari sacred mountains are in fact Titans, then the Temple of the Sacred Ashes, which sits above a Titan, may very well be part of that protection. Mythal's temple is a sacred site to the Avvar, and it sits above a Titan that remains pure and whole. This Titan was not subjugated. It was doing just fine on its own. Mythal did not kill the Titan upon which her temple stood. The dwarves are the children of Titans, the children of the Mountain Father, but the dwarves were taken under Mythal's wing in the mines in Trespasser, and were protected by her. They perhaps still are to some extent, since Flemeth's interactions with Dwarven Wardens are no different from those of anyone else, or Dwarven Inquisitors, and she even checks in on Sandal in DA2, though we have no idea what's happening there. Flemeth stands now against the Blight, whose primary threat has been to the dwarves and not the surface for as long as it has existed. The Avvar legends of Terda Britax and the Alamari stories of Luthias the Dwarf Son both reference the Lady of the Skies or someone called Morriganen working closely with or for the dwarves. The legend of Arrowwood from the Syrian, closely linked to the Alamari, suggests the Witch of the Arbor Wilds, or the Lady of the Skies, or an old hag and her daughters, helped to stop a man who was said to literally shoot the sun from the sky. The Lady of the Skies, Mythal, the Witches of the Wilds, all of these actors are one and the same, and all are allied against whoever wants to subjugate the earth, to shoot down the sun, to cause such destruction. They care for the humans and the dwarves as much as for the elves, who also recognise Flemeth as Ashur-Belinar, the woman of many years. Mythal's role was not in conquering and destroying the Titans, but in protecting them, in doing as she has always done, preserving the balance, maintaining the old, protecting what was as well as what will be. This sets up a conflict, but this video is getting long, so we'll dig down into the impacts of this alignment in part 3. Thanks for watching, and if you like my content, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. Thank you as well to all my current Patreon supporters, without whom content like this would not be possible.